So most of the profound, life-changing epiphanies you've had, like in the middle of the night, yeah, they were actually just your nervous system lying to you.
Oh, absolutely. It's a harsh truth.
Right. And today we are going to teach you exactly how to catch it in the act. Welcome to the deep dive.
I'm really excited to get into this one.
Me too. So picture this scenario for a second. You are standing at a massive crossroads in your life. Like maybe you're staring down the barrel of a major career change.
Or, you're sitting in your car outside your house realizing a long-term relationship has just completely run its course.
Exactly. And suddenly it hits you. You get a gut feeling that is so undeniable about exactly what you need to do next. But then, almost immediately, the shadow of doubt creeps in.
Yeah, that inevitable second guessing.
Right. You start wondering, how do you actually know if that feeling is deep, authentic wisdom? What if it's just your ego? Or, your hidden fears and trauma responses playing this really sophisticated trick on you?
It represents, honestly, the ultimate human dilemma because we rely so heavily on our internal signals to navigate life.
We really do.
But that internal signaling system is notoriously prone to being hijacked by our own biology. We routinely convince ourselves we are making this bold, soul-aligned choice, but neurologically speaking, we are literally just running away from discomfort.
Wow. Yeah, just running away. So, to solve this, we've pulled together a really fascinating stack of sources for today's deep dive.
It's a great mix today.
It really is. On one hand, we're looking at ancient philosophical texts, specifically translations that map out the anatomy of inner knowing through this Vedantic concept called Viveka.
Which is basically the practice of extreme discernment, the ability to surgically separate the real from the unreal.
Right. But we're also cross-referencing that ancient philosophy with modern cognitive psychology and neurobiology papers. And while there is some immediate friction between these sources.
Oh, massive friction. Because the Vedantic philosophy insists that true wisdom is incredibly quiet and neutral.
Yeah, whereas modern behavioral psychology often argues that, high arousal emotions are actually necessary to drive major behavioral changes.
Right, so reconciling those two completely opposite viewpoints is going to be our main challenge today.
Exactly. So the mission for today is to give you a bulletproof, step-by-step diagnostic protocol. By the end of this conversation, you will have the tools to test your own insights in real time.
Basically putting your own nervous system on the witness stand.
I love that phrase. And just to set the rules here, this deep dive is not about telling you what specific choice to make when you hit that crossroads.
Right, we can't make the choice for you.
No, we are exclusively focusing on how to filter the genuine signal from the biological noise.
Perfect.
Okay, let's unpack this baseline, because before you can test an insight, you kind of have to know what you're actually listening for.
You need to know what truth sounds like compared to illusion.
Exactly. The philosophical sources draw a very sharp line between what they call soul wisdom and what they call the mimic or Maya. So what is the actual recognizable signature of true soul wisdom?
So the primary hallmark of authentic wisdom is a state the texts refer to as a tonal neutrality.
A tonal neutrality. What does that feel like?
It is fundamentally quiet. Soul wisdom, it never yells at you. It completely lacks that desperate buzzing vibration of needing to be heard or obeyed right this second.
So there's no panic at all.
Absolutely no panic. It arrives in your consciousness as just a quiet, objective
It's
fact.
such a calm delivery of information.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And alongside that neutrality, it brings this physiological sense of what they call expansive resonance.
It's like an internal settling.
Yeah. Even if the information it's delivering is objectively terrifying, the realization that you need to leave a really comfortable, lucrative career, the actual reception of that truth brings a sense of settling. You literally feel a sudden expansion of space in your chest. And it's also inherently concise. It does not promise you a comfortable outcome. It doesn't paint a picture of this flawless future. It just points to the next step.
It just says this is the path.
Exactly. Without offering a single guarantee that the path will be easy.
Okay, so we have our baseline for truth. It's quiet, it creates physical expansion, and it's brutally concise. But then we introduce the antagonist of the story, which is the mimic.
Yes, the ego.
Right, and this is where the cognitive psychology sources really align with the ancient philosophy. Because the ego, or the conditioned mind, is this highly adaptive survival mechanism.
It's brilliant, honestly.
It is. It's brilliant at taking its deepest, most primal fears and dressing them up in the language of profound divine insight.
It employs what we can call the architecture of illusion. And first and foremost, illusion uses the frequency of urgency.
Oh, like FOMO, fear
Yeah.
of missing out.
Exactly. It's built entirely on scarcity.
Yeah.
If your insight is screaming at you that you must take action in the next 5 minutes to secure your destiny, or, the metaphorical window of opportunity will close forever, you are almost certainly dealing with an illusion.
It's so funny because modern behavioral economics uses that exact same scarcity trigger, like to make us impulse buy items online with those little countdown timers.
Yes, the ticking clock.
It sounds like our ego is basically running a predatory marketing campaign against our own prefrontal cortex.
I really love that. That is a remarkably accurate way to frame it. The ego manufactures scarcity to just completely bypass your logical reasoning.
Because you don't have time to think.
Right. And it also relies heavily on emotional charges to flood the system. So we're talking about spikes of righteous indignation or manic, ungrounded euphoria or just intense, vibrating anxiety.
And it repeats itself, doesn't it?
Oh, constantly. It plays on a loop of repetition. It operates like a skipping record, just repeating the exact same obsessive thought over and over again. It's attempting to force compliance through sheer psychological volume.
Okay, I have an analogy for this to make it relatable.
Yeah.
True soul wisdom is basically like a plain text weather report. You open it up on your phone and it just says, it's raining.
That's good.
Right. No drama, no emotional manipulation, just the facts. The illusion, on the other hand, is like a frantic, malicious internet pop-up ad. It's flashing neon colors, alarms are going off, and it's screaming, click now or lose everything.
Yes. I love the pop-up ad analogy. That perfectly highlights another critical feature of the mimic, which is over-intellectualization.
Oh, like overthinking it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like a scammer trying to keep you on the phone, the illusion requires constant maintenance to stay alive in your mind. And it has to build these complex, multi-tiered justifications to prove its validity to you.
So if I'm pacing my kitchen, drafting a 5-point mental thesis to justify why I need to make a certain choice,
You are dealing with an intellectual construct. Yep. True wisdom does not require a defense attorney. It does not need a complex argument to sustain itself. It simply is.
okay, but if the pop-up is screaming at us and our brain is throwing up all these complex justifications, we can't exactly just close the browser. So how do we actually handle that so-called profound insight the exact moment it strikes?
So this is where we move out of the philosophy and into the actual protocol of discernment. Phase I is what we call the point of inception. When that insight hits you at the crossroads, you must initiate an absolute suspension of action.
Meaning you deliberately do nothing.
You do absolutely nothing. You refuse to agree with the insight, and equally importantly, you refuse to fight the insight.
So you just observe it.
You mentally pick it up with tweezers and place it on a sterile examination table. See, the immediate biological reaction of the ego is to act, to resolve the tension. So your first line of defense is simply refusing to move.
But sitting there doing absolutely nothing while an insight is burning a hole in your brain, that is agonizing. What are we supposed to do with all that pent-up physical energy while we wait? We can't just, stare at a wall.
And that brings us to phase two, which is somatic mapping.
Wow.
You shift your attention entirely away from the thought itself and into the physical body.
Because the body can't lie, right?
Exactly. The fundamental rule across both ancient Vedantic texts and modern somatic psychology is that the body cannot lie. It is physically bound to the present moment, whereas the ego is constantly time-traveling. It's projecting catastrophic failures into the future or ruminating on past regrets.
The physical nervous system processes truth much faster than the conscious mind.
It really does.
So you scan your vitals, you look for the physical sensation accompanying the insight, and if it's an illusion, the sympathetic nervous system engages. You get that somatic constriction.
A tight chest, shallow breathing.
Right, a knotted stomach, or maybe a buzzing electric tension at the base of your skull.
Which is simply the mammalian survival mechanism kicking in. That constriction is just fear masking as intuition.
Okay, wait. I have to push back here. Let's apply this to a real scenario. If my genuine, authentic soul wisdom tells me that I need to quit my incredibly stable, well-paying job to start a risky business, wouldn't my body naturally be terrified?
Well, yes.
Right, I would expect my chest to be tight and my stomach to be in knots because quitting my job is objectively a scary thing to do. How on earth do you tell the difference between illusion anxiety and scary truth anxiety?
That is a brilliant question, and it's exactly where the vast majority of people abandon the protocol. To answer that, we have to look at a concept called the Vijnanamaya Kosha.
The wisdom sheath.
Yes, it represents a much deeper layer of human consciousness. When you are dealing with genuine wisdom, even if the directive is completely daunting, The truth translates physically as a deep anchor.
Walk me through what a deep anchor actually feels like neurologically.
Sure, so you might absolutely experience surface-level anxiety. Your palms might sweat, your heart rate might elevate because your sympathetic nervous system recognizes a real risk.
Sure, does that make sense?
But underneath that surface noise, at the very root of your body, there is a heavy, undeniable grounded sensation. Your shoulders physically drop away from your ears. Your breathing actually deepens into your diaphragm rather than staying shallow in your chest.
So the deep physical anchor remains.
Exactly. The truth anchors the physical body, whereas the illusion scatters the body's energy. It is the distinct difference between feeling terrified but planted firmly on solid rock versus feeling terrified and suspended in midair.
Terrified but on solid rock, that distinction is so crucial. It's not about the complete absence of fear, it's about the presence of a deeper stability beneath the fear.
Right. And following that somatic map, you have to analyze the frequency driving the thought through energetic classification. The Vedantic sources map human energy using the three gunas, which are fundamental operating forces.
Okay, let's give these forces some modern context for everyone listening. The first guna is rajasic energy.
Yes, the frantic energy.
Right, it's highly caffeinated drive. Does the insight make you feel fiercely ambitious or highly competitive or desperate to escape your current situation? If the energy feels like you are trying to outrun a predator or crush a competitor, that is just the ego masking as intuition.
Spot on. And the exact opposite of that is kamasic energy, which is characterized by this heavy, sluggish inertia.
Like giving up.
Right. Does the insight suggest that you should just hide away or adopt a stance of helpless victimhood?
Yeah.
Because the modern ego absolutely loves to frame this tamasic avoidance as, letting go or surrendering to the universe.
Yeah.
In reality, it's just fear masquerading as spiritual detachment. You are not surrendering, you're just quitting because you are afraid to try.
That is so common. But the ultimate goal is the third state, sattvic energy. This is luminous, clear, and totally neutral. It's the crystal clear water. It exists without needing to destroy anyone else and without needing to hide from anything. It's just clean.
And that sattvic neutrality is the undeniable signature of the soul.
Okay, so let's assume an insight passes the physical tests. Your body feels grounded on solid rock, and the energy feels sattvic and clean. Now it has to face its absolute greatest enemy, which is time.
Time is the ultimate filter.
Yes. This takes us to phase 3, the temporal audit, or the 72-hour window. Because illusion has a rapidly decaying half-life, it's entirely reliant on neurochemicals.
Right. The urgency you feel is fueled by adrenaline, cortisol, or temporary dopamine spikes triggered by the novelty of a new idea.
So the protocol mandates a strict 72-hour observation window. You do not take action, and you do not even speak the insight aloud to anyone else for 3 full days.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
It is. Let's unpack the biological mechanism there. When an insight hits with intense emotional force, your amygdala, which is the brain's threat and emotion center, has essentially hijacked the nervous system.
It takes significant time for those stress hormones to just flush out of your bloodstream, and for your prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning center of your brain, to fully come back online.
Right.
And what's fascinating here is, if the insight is an egoic projection, the false urgency will simply burn off. Once the cortisol fades, that profound truth will collapse into confusion or doubt, or you'll suddenly find yourself obsessed with a completely different problem.
But genuine soul wisdom is structurally permanent.
Exactly. Day 3 feels exactly as clear, quiet, neutral as day 1.
But those 72 hours are a total minefield. The ego realizes it is being starved of action, and it fights back viciously. It will actively try to force a false positive through a series of psychological traps.
Oh, it gets so sneaky here.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The first trap relies on hijacking your brain's pattern recognition software. It exploits a phenomenon called apophenia, which is the human tendency to find highly meaningful connections in completely random data.
Yes, this is commonly known as the synchronicity trap.
Let's use the red car effect as an analogy. You decide you want to buy a red car. Suddenly, everywhere you look on the highway, you see red cars. The universe didn't magically spawn thousands of red cars to confirm your choice.
Your brain's reticular activating system simply adjusted its biological filter to highlight what you are currently fixated on.
Exactly. And the ego weaponizes that biological filter.
Let's say your ego generates an illusion, like, I should text my toxic ex.
Classic.
Right. And suddenly you look at the clock and see their birth date. Or you overhear a stranger saying their name at a coffee shop.
And your brain immediately screams, it's a sign, the universe is telling me to text them.
Yes, but the protocol demands that you treat all external signs as null data. True soul wisdom is entirely self-evident. It never requires a magical trail of breadcrumbs or angel numbers or overheard coincidences to prove its validity.
The next trap is perhaps the most insidious for anyone who spends time in the self-improvement space: the spiritual bypass.
Oh, I see this everywhere.
This occurs when the ego uses high-level esoteric philosophical concepts to justify low-level behavioral avoidance.
The spiritualized ego is incredibly common.
It looks like framing a profound fear of conflict as, I'm just protecting my peace, or cutting a friend off without having a mature conversation because they lower your vibration.
Yeah. When you examine true soul wisdom, it rarely deals in blame or moral superiority. It might neutrally recognize that a relationship is a mismatch in life trajectories, but it does not need to villainize the other person to justify leaving.
That's such an important distinction.
If you catch yourself using spiritual jargon to avoid basic human accountability, you are listening to the mimic.
And this ties directly into what the sources call logic loops. If you find yourself in the shower, having aggressive imaginary arguments with your boss to prepare for quitting, or drafting massive mental essays to defend your insight, you are dealing with an intellectual construct. Truth does not require a rehearsed defense.
Finally, during this waiting period, the ego will inevitably deploy the external validation test. It will desperately urge you to call your friends, your mentors, or post about it online to corroborate the insight.
It wants friends.
It craves consensus to make the illusion feel real. But genuine soul wisdom requires absolute zero outside consensus. You might ask a friend for logistical advice on how to execute a move. Sure, but you do not need anyone to validate that the wisdom itself is correct.
So what does this all mean? Let's transition to the final stage. The 72 hours have passed. Your body is anchored. You have successfully ignored the fake synchronicity signs, and you haven't outsourced the decision to your friends. The insight is still sitting there on the examination table, quiet and clear.
It is real.
So what exactly do you do with it now?
You enter phase phi, integration and execution. And the very first step here is universally difficult. You must acknowledge the directive and entirely divorce it from your personal preference.
Because soul wisdom is frequently completely divorced from what you actually want to be true.
Often, yes.
You might deeply desire for a struggling relationship to miraculously heal, but the quiet, neutral truth sitting in your chest is that it's over. You have to accept the reality of the signal, regardless of your emotional preference.
Exactly. And once you accept it, you shift gears neurologically. Up until now, we have been keeping the intellect out of the way, but now you need it. Wisdom provides the what. It gives you the clear destination. But your cognitive reasoning, your intellect, is required to formulate the logistical how.
So the soul says, you need to move to a new city. The intellect says, okay, let's open a spreadsheet, check our savings account, and research moving companies.
Perfectly stated. You use your logic to execute the strategy. But here is the final, ultimate rule of execution, and it is where the Vedantic philosophy truly shines. You must take the necessary action while entirely severing your attachment to the outcome.
Wait, practically speaking, how is that remotely possible? If my soul wisdom tells me to leave my stable job and start a business, I absolutely have to care about the outcome. If I don't care, I won't work hard, the business will fail, and I won't be able to pay my rent. How do you sever attachment to your own survival?
That's a great point. But it is crucial to distinguish between logistical care and psychological attachment.
Yeah.
You absolutely care about the quality of your work. You care about paying your rent and executing your business plan meticulously.
Okay, so what am I severing?
What you sever attachment to is the demand for external validation or a guaranteed emotional payoff. Soul wisdom dictates the alignment of your action. You start the business because it is the truthful path, but it guarantees absolutely nothing about the reaction of the external market. You have a difficult conversation with your partner because it is the truth, not because you are guaranteed they will understand, agree, or forgive you.
You act in perfect alignment with the truth, and you completely surrender the world's reaction to it.
Yes. You remove the emotional dependency on the outcome.
Let's bring this all together for everyone listening. We just mapped out a rigorous diagnostic protocol. When that profound feeling hits you, do not move. Suspend action.
Just put it on the table.
Right. Check your somatic map. Are you constricted with sympathetic nervous system anxiety, or do you feel a heavy, grounded anchor of truth beneath the fear?
Look for the sattvic energy.
Then, Enforce a strict 72-hour waiting period to let the panic neurochemicals flush out of your system. Ignore the fake synchronicity signs from your brain and refuse to seek external consensus.
And if it survives all of that?
If it survives all of that, formulate a logical plan and execute it without demanding that the world applauds you or hand you a guaranteed victory.
By applying this framework, you stop being a passive victim of your shifting neurochemistry and your ego's survival tactics.
You become an active scientist of your own mind. It frees you from the exhausting, endless loop of over-intellectualization and panic-driven decisions. You finally get the tools to step off the roller coaster.
You know, if we look closely at the very end of this protocol, this raises an important question.
What's that?
The absolute standard for genuine truth is that it requires zero external validation. It stands completely alone, independent of consensus. If that is true, how much of our modern daily lives, and honestly, how much of our entire societal structure, is built entirely on the illusion of needing other people to validate our reality?
That's a huge point.
We spend an enormous amount of our lifespan crowdsourcing our life choices through social media, peer groups, and cultural expectations. If we applied Viveka to society at large, how many of our so-called urgent priorities would simply evaporate into thin air?
That is a staggering thought. If we completely stopped needing everyone else to agree with our truth, the entire architecture of how we live and what we consume would change overnight.
It really would.
We will leave you to ponder that the next time you find yourself standing at a crossroads. Until next time.